Hello and welcome to Cookie Bucket. Man, what episode is this, guys? Zach, what episode is
Beats
this?
me.
You know what? I think it might be episode 69.
No way.
Yeah.
Nice. Did you know that the film we're doing, American Psycho, which came out in 2000, has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes?
That's kind of nuts. Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm not kidding.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay, that joke is gone now. American Psycho is a 2000 horror comedy thingy. Just on a side note, I keep choosing like non-definable movies when it comes to
That's true.
But
Yes.
Anyway, directed by Mary Harron, who wrote the script with Guinevere, Guinevere Turner, and adapted from Bret Easton Ellis's 1991 novel of the same name, with Edward R. Pressman as producer. It stars Christian Bale as Joker / Batman / Patrick Bateman, Willem Dafoe as Joker / Detective Norman Osborn / Guy from the Lighthouse / Don Kimball, a private investigator, Jared Leto as Fake Joker / Morbin Time / Paul Allen, Chloe Sevigny as Jean, Bateman's secretary, pre-Legally Blonde Reese Witherspoon as Evelyn Williams,
Yep.
and Bateman's fiance, who he hates a lot. Trump potentially drives by, and then Reagan gives a speech. The film follows Bateman, a New York City investment banker who leads a double life as a serial killer. It's a satirical film which blends horror and black comedy to mock 1980s yuppie culture and consumerism. So what do you guys think?
Well, I'll say, at the end of our last episode, Mitchell, you seemed to imply that, like, my opinion on the film was kind of against the fold, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll change my mind. It was, like, 2 or 3 years ago that I watched it and made that review, so maybe my opinion will change. But I think my opinion, I pretty much stick to it. I think it's a very well-made movie. It's probably Mary Harron's best film, and I don't know how she was able to make this, because this is only her second movie, and there is no way that a studio would ever let a director on their second film do this now, especially a pretty big distributor and producer. This movie just feels like filming in a major city with pretty big actors, with such a bizarre script and premise. You shared the trailer with us before this, and I was like, I pity the man who had to edit the trailer to this to make this seem like a summer thriller. But I think it's really well adapted from the book. I think it nails the tone of the book. At the same time, though, I do feel like as good as it is, it's so close to the book that I just sort of end up feeling like, why am I not reading the book? It's a bizarre feeling, because it is very well made. And it really, I think, nails what the book is going for and is a good movie. But I think at the same time, to get what the book and the film are both going for, I'd rather read the book, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Christian mentioned in his Letterboxd review that this is sort of like entirely tonally independent of anything. It's not really a horror film, and it's kind of a comedy, but it's the kind of comedy that if you, like, laughed at it with a date, you'd probably never see that date again. It's a very unusual movie, and I like it. It's a 3 out of 5, but it doesn't tickle my fancy in the way other movies do. It's a movie that I admire and enjoy observing, like I would look at like a Picasso in a museum, more than I like have fun with it and like actively enjoy it, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Fun.
Yeah, I've turned this over in my mind so many times after watching it, and I still don't really know what to think or how to feel, but I was certainly entertained. I landed on a 3.5 out of 5, and I liked it, but I don't really know what to say about it. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to explain what's good and what's bad, beyond the performances, maybe. I'm just thoroughly dumbfounded. I mean, Christian Bale is great, I think. He's totally giving it his all, and he's got, like, the physique and the sort of he's very expressive, but at the same time, you can tell that he's so emotionally distant and apathetic about what he's doing to other people. Like, he totally lacks empathy, despite how crazy his performance is, which is a hard balance to strike sometimes, and he totally does that. But I just don't know, like, the ending confused me a little bit. I had to, like, sort of rewatch it and then read up on it. And I don't know. I guess sort of like a comedy that is more than just a ha-ha comedy is a mark of satire, and some people are talking about how this is like a satire of the time period or whatever, the time period that the story took place in. And I guess that's fine and effective. I just, like, it's not that I didn't like it. It's not even that I have, like, specific criticisms for it. I just really have no idea what to say about it. But I liked it, and I'm ready for Mitchell to tell me what to say.
Stonks. All right. They could be criticizing 2000 too. But anyway. Yeah, I really enjoy this film, and I have no idea why. This is like, there's not a lot of times where well, first of all, there's not a lot of times where I'm even, like, available to finally see a movie that everyone's seen before and everyone's really liked, and I've, like, actively gone out and seen it myself and said it's great. But this is one of those times where I was like, I really went out on my own and, like, tried to figure this movie out, and I saw it a couple times. This is my third viewing now. Wow. And I mean, like I said in our last episode, I get something different every time when I see this. And now I feel like this was the most cohesive viewing for me. I really felt like, because I knew what was coming, and, like, I knew how the events were supposed to be strung together, and kind of, like, you know, character analyzing Bateman's and motivations and his interpretation of events is kind of like a completely different thing for me every time. And in a way, I feel like that's probably, like, the biggest detractor. I feel like that it kind of can get frustrating, especially the first time I saw it. I didn't really know what like the message I was trying to get was, and I guess that kind of falls back on what Zach was saying. Like, I felt like if I was reading this, I'd be able to hang on to a lot more of, like, the literary traits and like, I don't know, it just feels like it'd be a lot easier to invest in and kind of, like, wonder what Bateman's motivations are, and I feel like more imagination would have helped a lot more. We'll talk about that, especially with the ending, because of how much we actually saw is kind of one of the major detractors, even for the director herself, for the film, and I totally agree with that. But now that I've seen so many different interpretations of the film, and I've seen, like, how much of the events are actually real versus how much of it's just in Bateman's head, how does Bateman, like, connect with the other investors, and how is that yuppie culture kind of satirical, and how much of it is actually just from Bateman's interpretation, how much of it is real, you know, how much of it, and it's also kind of like everyone has a stereotype of this kind of culture and everything, and in a lot of ways the culture is pretty close to being accurate in a lot of ways. I would say, not that I know anybody, like, personally or anything, but, like, just, you know, knowing, like, public knowledge of a lot of these, you know, investors and things. But yeah, I really enjoy, like, the philosophical aspects of it and kind of the psychoanalysis, no pun intended, of Bateman, and I understand, like, I feel like reading about him and reading about what he's doing and seeing, like, everything from his perspective is way easier to pull off in writing than it is, you know, on screen. But yeah, I really enjoy this film. I think it's great for many reasons we'll discuss in a bit, but I gave it a 4 out of 5. So Christian Bale extensively studied the novel and the character of Bateman in order to get the feel of the character. He distanced himself from others while on set in order to create a mysterious, unsettling vibe. So how do you think the performances went over? And you obviously don't have to just focus on Bale's for this, but...
Well, I'm immediately going to jump in and say that I know he's become, like, a big joke now, kind of over the past couple of years, but I think Jared Leto is really good in this. Nice. I think Jared Leto is good in most of his earlier movies, and it's kind of like Suicide Squad on, where he sort of actively turned himself into a meme, slash cult leader, potentially, but we won't get into that. But I think... I mean, Paul Allen isn't in a huge amount of the movie, or is he? But the amount that we see of him on screen, I think Jared Leto does a great job playing this sort of, like, feckless doofus that probably doesn't even know what his own job is, but he gets a lot of money from it, and like I do think he plays that really well. I think the scene, I mean the iconic hip to be square scene that like everybody has at least heard about or like recognizes lines from, even if they haven't seen it. I think he plays that really well. I love the line, "Why you got the style section all over the place?" I think Reese Witherspoon's great in it too. I mean, Bela's the standout here, but everybody else who is in this, I think, does really well. I want to shout out the writer of my second favorite Marvel film, Justin Theroux, who is one of the businessmen in this film. He's the one that that Bateman's fiance is cheating on him with. I think everybody, particularly the people who play like the yuppie businessmen in this, all have that perfectly sort of like detached, chauvinistic like showmanship to them that I think really works for the environment that the film is going for, where you get the feeling that all of them are kind of putting on an act for each other or for themselves or for the people around them. And then you've got Bateman in the middle of them, who Bateman is doing the same thing, and in a lot of ways for the same purposes, but just the act that he's putting on is a lot more extreme than anybody else's. And yeah, I mean, in terms of performances, I think it's basically a perfect movie. I don't think anybody in this is bad by any means. I mean, I would have liked to see more of Willem Dafoe, but the few moments that he shows up in, he's great in. There's a single shot in this where he like looks up from his notepad and just does like a smile, and it might be the single creepiest shot in the whole movie. Just because Willem Dafoe is a scary looking man. Yeah, performances are great.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I want to shout out Chloe Sevigny's performance though, because I think sort of everyone, not just the other like businessmen and Defoe, but also Reese Witherspoon is kind of a caricature as well, and I think Savini's character is kind of like the realist person in the movie probably, and she does that really well. And you can see like when she's at Bateman's apartment, you can see her like playing things through her mind, and there's like pulls and temptations, and I think that sort of juxtaposition with Bateman is done really, really well. I don't know. I mean, I liked Willem Dafoe. I always love Willem Dafoe and everything. But sort of like, I remember we were discussing the new Thor trailer a little bit ago, and Zach, you said something along the lines of, why do they bother to get Christian Bale in this when it seems like he's just kind of going to be like a bad guy who does the bad thing?
Yeah. And
I kind of wonder if they needed Willem Dafoe to play what was a pretty standard detective part, but I mean, he does it just fine. Yeah, I don't really have much more to add. Bale is pretty much perfect, and I think the performances are probably why I was into it, because there's just something so like almost too unique with regards to the story and the film itself that I would probably have a hard time being invested or maintaining attention if the performances weren't so good.
Yeah. Yep, I agree with all that. Yep, the businessmen scenes are like some of the most engaging, and I feel like the thing that really works for me is how perfectly believable and satirical it is. And like, obviously I know a lot of the dialogue was taken from the book, but like the business card scene is just the way, how intense and how determined they all are, and the subtleties between them. I mean, they're all the same, but they're also different, that kind of paradox. And like they just, their priorities are so out there and so out of whack, but they're so, you almost believe them when they're talking about like the different colors of their freaking business cards, like the different whites and everything. And it's just like, and not to mention Christian Bale's, it obviously is focused on Bateman, because Bateman is trying to figure out how he places in this culture and whether or not he's able to even fit in the first place. Because even for us, because we're seeing things from his perspective, we can't really tell 100% if he's actually like being accepted or not. And he's not sure either, even though he has to act like he is. And he's so, I mean, they everything, but he's so nonchalant, but they're also so committed at the same time. Like they're so invested and not invested at all. And it's like, I mean, the dialogue and the performances for me like totally make the movie in that way. And then that's just not to mention like Christian Bale's individual scenes with the prostitutes and the kind of his progression into madness using those scenes. And I feel like they're paced really well and juxtaposed with those day-to-day scenes. And one other thing I wanted to mention, even though it's not so much the performances, the way that all of them are written, they're always talking with each other, they're always going to meetings, but they're never actually doing any work.
Yeah.
Because we all know that they're all investors and they all are like super rich and have tons of connections everywhere, but we have no idea what any of them actually do specifically. Yeah. And I feel like that is also accentuated by their character traits and everything. And also the sidebar with the I don't want to make any assumptions, but the guy that was making advances on Christian Bale's character after he had tried to choke him and everything, and it's just it just adds on to how out of touch Bateman is with everyone else, and even with this one guy that feels out of place for being, I'll assume that he's gay in this context, and that he feels even more out of place than he does in that culture, and he has to resort to going to a homeless guy, killing a homeless guy, and prostitutes, and everything after Paul Allen and things like that. It's just it shows him slowly weave his way out of his own position in that culture, and I feel like that is super well done, and I really don't think there's a lot of complaints there. But I totally agree with Jared Leto's character. He was there for a perfect amount of time. He plays a relatively minor role, but I think it works great for him. And I agree with Willem Dafoe. He's not necessarily like he's a super standout, but he's very like nonchalant and progressive about things. And just I was saying about like the dichotomy, like you feel like he's making progress with the investigation, but you also feel like he's making no progress at all.
Yeah.
Just because of the self-defeating culture that they're in. So I heavily enjoy all of that, and I'll go on to my next thing, I guess.
Yeah. I do want to jump in and say, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that they never really do any work. Because I think that adds to some of the lines and some of the humor of it. Because there's a scene where Bateman says, Halberstrand and I do the same thing. And I wrote in my notes, so you do nothing.
Yeah, right.
You go to meetings and you get lunch and you compare your business cards. But whenever he's in his office, he's just sitting in his office. He's not actually doing any work. He's not writing any paperwork. He'll not answer the phone. He'll tell his secretary I'm not here. So at that point, what is he actually managing or overlooking, or what work is he actually doing? It's a great point, I think.
Yeah. Every time Gene brings something to him, he's like, just say no, and it doesn't matter that all he does is say no every single time.
Yeah. Yep. So as I mentioned, the vast majority of the dialogue is taken word for word for the novel. Do you feel like the film falls into a definable genre, and does it feel like a book adaptation?
Is this a Christmas movie?
Yeah, is it a Christmas movie? It's got Christmas in it.
It does.
Does it actually? Oh,
yes,
wait.
yeah, there's a Christmas party.
Wait a minute.
For a few minutes.
Wow. How about that? Oh, that's just a dumb joke. I guess by definition, it's an adaptation. I haven't read the book, so I can't really testify about how accurate it is to the events of the book. Is it? I don't feel like this is a horror movie. I don't. I think people are probably eager to call it that because he's a serial killer, and there's a couple shots where they don't really show that much. They kind of just show bloody bodies after it's happened most of the time. And those are pretty brief and not really that scary. I don't know. I think this is probably more of a thriller than a horror for me. And certainly a comedy, but it's like you said before, Mitchell, it's pretty much impossible to define concretely. But I think part of why I was so taken aback is because this didn't really strike me as a horror film, and that's sort of the description it's given most often by most people.
Yeah.
And I guess I would commend it for not fitting one box specifically, because at least that keeps the viewer on their toes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think debating what genre this film settles into kind of highlights a failure of the genre categorization system in the first place. In that, I mean, as soon as something starts to try to do something other than just tick the specific boxes of an actual genre, it becomes kind of impossible to qualify. Because, I mean, and a lot of films do this. You encounter this with a lot of things. Like, you get into the issue of, like, how do I define this thing that doesn't really have a set definition? Because the content in this film, I can see someone being horrified by. I mean, we don't see much actual murder, but then again, there's other, like, films that are undeniably horror films where we don't really see much either. I mean, it's a very different kind of film, but, like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you notoriously never actually see anybody being directly killed on screen in that film. You just sort of hear it and it's implied. And additionally, like, calling this a comedy, well, it gets really dark and there are deaths as well, so I do agree it's kind of impossible to qualify, but at the same time, I think by that logic, a lot of things are kind of impossible to qualify unless it's, like, the dumbed-down, most basic kind of a movie that you can find. I definitely think that this feels like a book adaptation. And a large part of that, I think, comes into play with the ending, where it's very clearly going for, like, an unreliable narrator thing. I mean, the whole movie is, but that becomes really noticeable by the ending, where people are referring to him by different names, and ATMs are telling him to feed them cats, and cars are exploding when he shoots them with a single bullet. And that's the kind of thing that does show up in films, but it seems to be a kind of plot device that's much more confined to writing, because it's easier to portray through writing, I think.
Yeah.
Because through writing, you're relying so much more on the the reader's interpretation and the reader's own sort of mental image of events. So as soon as you transfer that to film, it's going to be more difficult to portray that unreliability and that sort of abstractness without getting really artsy and really distant in a way that, say, like a David Lynch would do. And this film has that abstraction and that unreliability without going, like, full Lynch, which I admire it for. I think it definitely confuses people in a way that maybe the ending in the book doesn't. But I don't think it's too hard to figure out, like, oh, okay, we're kind of seeing this through his head, and nothing is real, really. Or nothing can be proved to be real, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I also haven't read the book either. And yeah, in terms of defining a genre, I mean, to me, like, I laugh a lot in this, especially towards the end. Like, I was actually laughing out loud just because I have dark humor in general. But I mean, I think for anybody, there's some elements of comedy in here. And I mean, but like you said, Zach, like, people are dying, and, you know, it's like a pitch black satirical comedy with horror and thriller elements, basically. Is what I'll say, and maybe some tiny bit of drama, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, the unreliable narrator thing kind of obscures that, but yeah, I think it certainly lends to the uniqueness. And as far as I've heard, the novel kind of has the same type of thing, but like you discussed about the unreliable narrator, it's actually my next question. Zach always predicts my next freaking question every time, But yeah, it definitely does feel like there are literary elements. I mean, I feel like the dialogue was executed well enough where it didn't feel like it came from a book necessarily, which I mean, that's like a neutral thing. I don't think that's like a great thing or a terrible thing, but I think definitely using a lot of the dialogue from the book pays off here. And I think I certainly think the dialogue is more essential to the scenes than the cinematography or the real style they're trying to go for, although it definitely accentuates it. I think the discussions and the psychology behind Bateman is more important than most of what they're actually doing. And I think the unreliable narrator thing definitely supports that, but I do think you can get into the abstract too much. So we're going to go into my last thing then. There's no other comment. During an interview with Charlie Rose, Harron states that one thing I think is a failure on my part is people keep coming out of the film thinking it's all a dream, and I never intended that. All I wanted was to be ambiguous in a way that the book was. I think it's a failure of mine in the final scene because I just got the emphasis wrong. I should have left it more open-ended. It makes it look like it was all in his head, and as far as I'm concerned, it's not. So do you think Bateman is a reliable narrator, and is everything actually happening in your interpretation?
That quote is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because if it's not all in his head, then what? What does that last interaction indicate? If it's not all in his head, is that guy lying? Is he confused? Is he? I mean, you're just opening up so many more questions by answering that one, really. So I don't know. I think she's probably being a little too harsh on herself. I don't think that she like failed as a director in placing the emphasis on anything.
Yeah.
Because I certainly had no clue coming out of it. I wasn't certain of anything, and insofar as like once you answer that, you're only met with more questions. I think it's pretty hard to bungle that ambiguity completely. I have no idea whether he's hallucinating or whatever, or his name is Dave or not. I don't know. But I don't think I don't know. I think there's always more than one way to tell a story well. And I don't think the way that Mary Harron told this was bad or insufficient.
I'm also going to agree that I think she's being too harsh on herself, because I really like the ending, and something I didn't notice until this viewing, which this could be a blue curtain situation, but I really like the sign behind Bateman in the final shot of the film where they zoom into his eyes. There's a door behind him, and the sign on the door says, "This is not an exit."
Yep.
As in, this is not the end, which could be a blue curtain thing, but I feel like that really works with what the ending of this movie is going for. I think that Bateman is sort of the ultimate example of an unreliable narrator, because he is psychotic and he's always putting on an act. And I think the ending is really just an indication that those lines have blurred to the point that even he can't remember what's real and what's not anymore. And I think that's fine. I don't think as a viewer that you're meant to know what happened and what didn't happen and what was real and what wasn't real, because I think Patrick doesn't even know that. I think some of the stuff in this film definitely happened, but I think other things in this film were just things that he wanted to happen, or he wishes he could have done, or he might have done, but he can't really remember. And I also think some of the commentary coming into the ending of the book and the film here is it comes back to that idea of sort of these identical marching yuppie businessmen who are kind of all the same and all have the same jobs and all dress the same and all basically have the same business card, even though some might be bone and some might be eggshell, and sort of adding to that idea of well people can't even tell Bateman apart from other people. Maybe he's Dave, maybe he's Smith, maybe he's Bateman, maybe he's Halberstrand, and maybe he's only one of them, and people are just can't tell them apart because they all seem the same and act the same and do the same jobs and are striving for monotony. Something I like about this movie is that Bateman likes really kind of generic music. And it's because he's trying to fit in. And in later scenes, he even tells Reese Witherspoon, like, well, the important thing to me is to fit in with other people. So he doesn't really have, like, opinions or ideas or thoughts of his own. He just has this motivation to blend in with others and appear like other people. So Genesis' first two albums are too arty for him. So he's just going to dismiss those, and we're going to move on to the more poppy ones, which are more successful on an artistic and critical level.
Hip to be square.
It's hip to be square, yeah. And I think that's kind of some of the commentary that's coming into play at the end, which maybe throws some people off track, and that maybe Mary Harron is worried she emphasized in the wrong way, which confuses people, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, you guys make great points. There's a couple things I wanted to mention. The the forgetting the names thing is like a really common thing early on. If you listen to conversation beats, there are very specific moments where there's other characters that will literally say people's names or correct themselves, or they'll even call people by their entirely different names. And that obviously becomes evident towards the end when his own lawyer forgets his name and just doesn't care. And he's like, I just saw Paul Allen. We don't even know if he actually did see Paul Allen.
Yeah.
I mean, Bateman was even able to tell the prostitute that his name was Paul Allen, and like he doesn't even know or doesn't even care.
Yeah.
And like the same thing with, I mean, obviously there are some things like the dropping the chainsaw and killing her doesn't really make sense. The cars exploding, the cat and the ATM, how he was able to get away with all of that. But maybe the cops don't care. Maybe the cops don't care that there's all these yuppies making all these bad decisions, or they're paid off, or everyone's just completely like absolved and not a part of anything. Paul Allen's apartment is, we don't even know if that was his real apartment or who he really is. And a lot of that comes from like interpretation and assumption, and I feel like that's way better than if they just full scale, like if Harron just was like everything's made up, everything's abstract. And I agree, I don't think it came across as that at all. And what was I gonna say? I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it was left up to the right amount of interpretation. I definitely think multiple viewings definitely help you be more consistent about it. But yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, Zach can take the freaking neutral stance and say we're not supposed to know anything, and Christian's like, I don't know what's going on. But I think a lot of the stuff towards the end was made up in his head, and I think he actually did kill someone. And I don't know if maybe he did kill all of those other people as well. I mean, it doesn't really matter, which is sad. But yeah, I mean, I think he definitely did kill a lot of those people, and I think him getting away with it is more evident in the satire than it is with his unreliable narration. But I feel like the transference between those, the unreliable narration and the satire elements, is pretty seamless and interpretive to the point where I think it's executed really well. But that's all I had to mention. So if you guys have any other final thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to shout out the sound design. Particularly in the business card sequence. There's some really great Foley in the business card sequence where, like, it turns it into, like, this tense, like, strenuous showdown. The business card holders make sounds like the cocking of a gun when they open. Business cards, like, hiss like venomous snakes when they get pulled out and presented to the group. Just some really great subtle touches in the Foley there to add to kind of Patrick Bateman's perspective of the moment, so that by the time he goes, my God, it even has a watermark, you're kind of like in the situation with him, even though it is funny.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, but I'll just say the music stuff is really great. Yeah. It's really great. It's all, like, it definitely matters at least a little bit what he's actually saying, even if it's not very substantive. And it is, like, written and delivered just perfectly. It's just really good.
Yeah, I mean, when he's listening with the headphones and the big meme when he's walking through the office and stuff like that. Yeah, this film has a really big meme cult following now. It's even on Wikipedia. Yeah. So that's how you know you've made it at that point. But yeah, I highly recommend this movie to anyone who's interested in the premise, and definitely not really a horror film like we kind of discussed, but it has elements of it, and I don't know. I mean, you just have to give it a shot and see if it's your type of thing. It might not totally connect with you maybe ever, or not the first time, but I definitely recommend seeing it again if you see it once and you're confused. So yeah.
All right, we can review?
Yep.
Okay. Well, in a harsh turnaround from American Psycho, I started watching 1977's Jesus of Nazareth this morning, which is it's a two-part TV movie from 1977 directed by Franco Zeffirelli, which is about the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, according to the Bible. And it's a huge production. I'm only partway into it. Like I said, it's two parts, and each is 3 hours, so this is a 6-hour endeavor, and I'm about an hour and a half into the first part right now. But I was very impressed during the opening credits, like immediately as soon as it begins, because seemingly everybody who was famous in 1977 is in this movie. James Earl Jones, Olivia Hussey.
I know that's who you watched it for, Zach.
Laurence Olivier is in it as well.
That
And a bunch of names I'm forgetting. Like, usually I try to keep track of the big names that I'm like, oh, this movie has so many that I was immediately just like, I can't keep track. There's like 8 Oscar winners in this film that was made for TV. So it was a big surprise for me. And it was also made with like the express like approval of the Catholic Church. The Pope was the one that suggested this movie be made. So it's a pretty big deal. That being said, I have so far encountered some issues with it, at least for me. Now, my opinion could turn around. I still have 4.5 hours left. But a lot of TV movies in the 70s are really long, more for the sake of just seeming like an event than actually being one. And also kind of for the sake of sneaking more ad breaks in. And this mostly avoids that, but it does feel like that every now and then. Where I kind of feel like, okay, do we need to go back to King Herod right now? Like, I kind of get what's going on with him. And I like Franco Zeffirelli as a director, and I think he was a good choice for this. In fact, the Pope actually insisted that Zeffirelli direct this movie or it shouldn't be made at all. And when the head of the Catholic Church says you shouldn't make a movie about Jesus unless one man directs it, I don't know, especially when your movie's produced in Catholic Italy, I feel like you're probably going to make that choice. But at the same time, Zeffirelli's direction, I think he thrives most when he's directing for cinema. And this movie is made for TV in the 70s, so it's in 4:3. A lot of the camera movements are pretty limited, even though they did film in the Middle East. So that brings its own impressive level to it. But a lot of the cinematic storytelling feels kind of stunted. That said, there are creative shots in this that I feel like you wouldn't see in a normal TV movie of the time. Like when Mary's introduced, we see her weaving, and we kind of see her through... I forget what the tool is called, but we kind of see her through the strands of her weaving, and then it tilts up, and then we see her face, which is just kind of a nice directing choice that I feel like you wouldn't see in a lot of TV productions from this time. A lot of TV productions would probably just cut to the room, and she would be in it weaving in a wide shot, and that would be the introduction. So far, my feelings on it are mixed. And I hear that the film gets a lot more impressive when adult Jesus shows up. Right now, he's like a toddler. In the stage that I'm watching it in, but so far, it's okay. We'll see what I think of it. My review will go up on Letterboxd probably in a couple days once I finish the second part, so keep an eye out on the City Mist Productions Letterboxd account.
Huzzah.
Oh gosh, I guess it's time for another Obi-Wan Kenobi update from me.
That sounds pretty
Mitchell,
bleak.
are
Come
you
on.
caught up?
No. Okay, fine. Fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Sorry.
My headphones are off.
Okay. So part 4 is the shortest installment we've had thus far. And spoiler warnings abound, of course. And we see Obi-Wan Kenobi attempting to rescue Leia from the Inquisitor's castle thingy. And I'll just say outwardly, this is by far my least favorite episode in the series so far. And I don't think it is as good as any of the Mandalorian episodes either. I was really quite disappointed. But the good stuff, there is good stuff. We've got Ice Cube Jr. in this episode playing a sort of small part as a rebel, and he's just really good. He's a fantastic actor. I had seen him in that, that one Aubrey Plaza movie.
Ingrid Goes West.
Thank you. And he's fantastic in that too. And I was excited to see what he would do in this series, and he did not disappoint. His part is small, but he does a really good job with it. But you get to see the real limitations of canon at this point, because Darth Vader is sort of just disappeared for most of this episode, sort of like floating around in his ship somewhere for no apparent reason, because he can't directly interact with Leia, because if he did, it would it would undo the whole original trilogy. So you've got these Inquisitors that are just Vader proxies, and much of the plot progression and emotional beats that pay out here are the exact same as the last episode. Leia is in peril. Obi-Wan has to go help her and rescue her, and he does. But wait, at the end of this episode, there's another thingy where the Inquisitors are going to get right back to him, and Vader's going to whatever. And at first I resisted comparisons to The Mandalorian, but the sort of like fetch and rescue repetitiveness does bear similarities to The Mandalorian and Grogu at this point. And, it's not terrible. There are moments, but the limitations of the scale of TV versus like the scale of Revenge of the Sith or the sequels it's just vastly noticeable all the time. And I think that it's fair to have higher expectations of this show, because there's a lot of baggage that comes with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Vader, and rightfully so, because they're some of the most iconic and beloved characters in like contemporary pop culture. So I sort of landed on the end of my Letterboxd review for this part, and you can see longish reviews for every part of my Letterboxd if you're interested. I finished with, so far the limited series has served as a depressing reminder that the powers that be care more about making something that people will watch rather than something that is well made unto itself. So there's 2 episodes to go. I hope they change my mind. I quite liked the first 2 episodes, but at the moment I am mostly disappointed.
From the outside looking in, this show is seeming very bizarre to me, because I feel like, from what you've described so far, the whole show is almost like a workaround of the existing canon so they can actually have a plot, because the whole thing in A New Hope is that Ben stayed on Tatooine to look after Luke from afar and make sure he was okay. But Luke, when he grows up, doesn't have any kind of idea that he's important. So nothing can actually really happen to Luke. So
that's why they're doing the whole thing with Leia instead of Luke, I think.
Do you feel like The Mandalorian being a Western kind of hurt Obi-Wan as a show? Because for the longest time, I'd heard like the pitch of like, we're going to do an Obi-Wan Western where he's like the man with no name who's just doing a separate thing on Tatooine while Luke is farming.
I mean, I think that would be great. I think that would work really well, and as long as there isn't like a lot of direct rescue of Luke, I think it could be totally independent of The Mandalorian and be good. I just think, simply put, the Mandalorian is significantly better than this. And I think what bothers me the most, there's some workarounds, like his interaction with Vader on the Death Star is kind of weird, and Leia's "You're My Only Hope" speech is a little more formal than it is emotional. But I think the weirdest thing that bothers me the most is in Empire Strikes Back, when Obi-Wan is still insisting that Luke is their last hope. Surely, after everything he's seen Leia go through in this series, he would totally acknowledge that Leia is as worthy of being the chosen one and is also Force sensitive. This is all information that he has. And so that is like the most glaring thing to me, that he would still prioritize Luke over Leia so much in the movies.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't know. It's tricky. It's hard. Yeah. It probably shouldn't exist, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I guess now's the time that we signal to Mitchell that he can come back.
Christian was like, honestly, there's something, and there's something, and then he says something that's funny that happened that was bad, and then Zach laughs, but like before that, Zach was like all inquisitive and like concerned, and then he's like, why don't they just do this, or like, why doesn't Disney just die or something?
To some people,
like,
really
I don't know how this show's going right now. I guess we'll see. I like this and the lore and whatever. All right. But anyway.
To some people, Cookie Pocket is a foreign film without subtitles.
Anyway, why women? Knights of Past Future. Best movie of all time. Before Doctor Strange in the Weird World.
What is happening?
X-Men Days of Future Past.
Oh, okay.
Bryan Singer. Man, this was kind of underrated when it came out. I'm not going to lie. I feel like this was pretty underrated. I feel like people were freaking on the Marvel train. This was the same year that Winter Soldier came out, I think.
Wow.
But in terms of like mixing the past versions of the X-Men with the future versions, this is the best that it could have possibly gone. And there's a really compelling story here. I was definitely invested in it, and it feels like it's just the stakes are actually there. And Peter Dinklage also, of course, pulls off a magnificent Trask, and kind of mixing in beats from the comics and beats from like older X-Men films, like just from the intro, just from the outset, you feel like you're coming out of the original trilogy. My sort of not Last Stand, but not Stand, whatever. But anyway, you're coming out of like the original trilogy in First Class, and you have the themes of both definitely are there, and you feel like Charles is really like two different characters, and he needs to go through that development process. You can feel like how immature and aimless and frustrated the younger mutants are versus like the old, completely withered, like, guys, you gotta save this stuff because we're all gonna die, you know. And sure, like on paper it sounds really generic, especially after all of the Avengers stuff and all of the Marvel stuff we've seen since then. It just sounds like another going back in the past movie, but I feel like it's executed really well here. And it's certainly one of the best, if not the best, X-Men film, honestly. Not counting Logan, obviously, but
Thank you.
but Hugh Jackman, like, he was totally meant like to play Wolverine. Like, he is Wolverine, man. Like, there's no other, and Magneto and both of them, Ian McKellen and Fassbender, are great. James McAvoy and Jennifer Lawrence, obviously, and you know, it's just. Halle Berry, why isn't Storm in everything more? Storm's great, but anyway, I besides some like really like gaping plot holes sometimes, to be honest, there are some pretty big ones that don't make a whole lot of sense. But I feel like the stakes and like how much you can get invested in any one of the characters so easily, especially with knowing the other movies, really makes up for that in strides. And I think it's really like the best they could have done with what they had. So. I gave it 4 stars. I mean, if you haven't seen it at this point, like Apocalypse, Oscar Isaac, I'm sorry. I'm just sorry. Apocalypse, it just ruined the train, and Dark Phoenix, I haven't even seen it, so, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, I also gave Days of Future Past a 4, and I would second everything Mitchell said.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you want to see these movies, you basically just want to have fun with it, and I think time travel is used like in the exact way it should to get you to see like engaging versions of characters and to insert the character into like exciting action set pieces. There's definitely plot holes, but it's a device that is basically used to put the character in more entertaining situations and for plot reasons and whatever, but it's all just fun. I mean, it's a good blockbuster, and I think it's what you want out of a superhero movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much just Back to the Future changing everything so the picture comes back, but it's the existence of all mutants ever, so that's the only difference. And JFK is a mutant. I knew it. In real life, he had Addison's disease, so technically he was a mutant in real life. Fun fact. But
I saw it. That's my contribution to this discussion.
Thanks, Zach. So next, are we on the minute of shooties?
We are, yes. This is Mitchell's Munitions Minute. Mitchell has a minute to talk about munitions in American Psycho. In 3, 2, 1.
So Bateman blows up the freaking cars. They don't do this in real life, so don't try to ban them. Glock 19, 9mm. It's a slightly smaller version of the Glock 17, and it's a very, very popular police weapon, especially in New York City Police Department. Bruce Willis might have started the whole invisible to airport metal detectors thing in Die Hard 2, because it's a polymer pistol, and it's 84%. Even though it's only 84% steel by weight, that's actually crazy. Like that's very unheard of when it comes to pistols. And the fact the rest of it is polymer is pretty crazy. But it only weighs 23.65 ounces. And it's very light and concealable, and it's been around for a really long time. It has exactly 34 parts, which is pretty small. So, yeah, there you go.
Wow. All right. That came in under a minute. Okay. Yep. So I guess we move on to the Marvelous Cinematography.
Huzzah. Yes.
Okay, so this time I'm talking about not that one, not yet. That's next time.
Oh no!
This time I'm talking about Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Oh
which
no!
We all saw your review, Zach.
I
Gun that camera.
I didn't like it back in 2014, and I still don't like it. Not for exactly the same reasons. I do agree with 14-year-old Zach that the climax goes on forever and does not excite me at all. But I think my biggest issue with it on this viewing is that this seems to want to be like a political thriller Marvel film. This wants to be all the President's Men with superheroes. They've even got Robert Redford. There you go. It's legitimate. He's passing the torch. But I think the issue with that is the beginning of this movie is very keen to emphasize the blurred lines of good and bad in the modern world and the lack of real heroes anymore, and how it's unusual for Captain America to be brought into that situation because he's used to kind of an old-fashioned view of right versus wrong. And I think that's really interesting for the first half. And then they kind of totally chuck all that out the window in the climax. There's a line toward the end of the film where Falcon says, it's getting kind of hard to know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys anymore, which is a good setup. And then Captain America responds, if they're shooting at you, they're the bad guys, which immediately just makes that issue totally black and white and ditches
Secure
all the
the
interesting
police state.
stuff from the first half.
Base cap.
I think
Authorite win.
my other issue with this film is that, and I don't think I've discussed this on the show before, but I don't like the Russo brothers. I think the Russo brothers know how to stage an interesting action scene. I'll give them that. They know how to direct the actors and stunt performers on camera, and they know how, or I should say on set, and they know how to come up with a sequence that'll be interesting. They know, okay, if she runs under the bridge here and he's on top of the overpass and he's trying to shoot down at her, but she sees the shadow. Like, the stuff that's happening within the scene, I think, is great. But in terms of how they film it, they shoot every action scene like a YouTube stunt reel, where I look at these action scenes and I feel like I'm watching a Corridor Crew video. And no disrespect to the Corridor Crew, I like their channel, I think they pull off some cool stunts, but so often the direction in those videos and in this film feels purely functional rather than having any kind of like style or creativity to it. If the Russo brothers want to film an action scene, they're gonna pretty typically choose the most obvious way to film that action scene, and that kind of bugs me. Not to mention, their color palette is essentially 50 Shades of Cement. So, wasn't too fond of this one. 2 out of 5. It's kind of... Now, I think it's the highest on my, 2 out of 5 on my list so far. So
As it should be.
So I think it came in just under the Avengers. But yeah, not too fond of it. And I have to say I'm not really looking forward to the Russo brothers gaining more control over this franchise as it moves forward, because we're getting to where I lost interest in Marvel right now.
What about the elevator fight scene? Isn't that like iconic and one of the best in the whole freaking thing?
It's fine.
Come on, man.
It really doesn't interest me. And maybe that's just that comes with like the characters or the setup. I mean, I think Captain America is more interesting as a serialized Indiana Jones style adventure like what Joe Johnston made than as a Jason Bourne style like thriller, which is very clearly what they're going for. Like there's lots of shaky cam, there's lots of like, we're in a small confined space and everybody's got to make little punches and one of my arms is stuck to the wall. And that just doesn't really vibe with me. I don't think the way that the first Captain America film did. But next up is Guardians of the Galaxy, which, full disclosure, I did rewatch this one before we're doing this episode. But going in, I was worried, because I remembered really enjoying this one, and there have been previous films in this series that I've really enjoyed that I've gotten to and gone, oh, okay. So, if you're interested to see if I still enjoyed it, or if I went, oh, okay, then tune in next time.
Guardians has to be like the most like overrated, overhyped movie. Like I think like the first one, like I think it's so bland. But we'll talk.
We'll
Oh
talk
my
about that
goodness!
Like
that's,
the
oh
first
my
one.
that's how
like,
I felt about Winter Soldier.
Well, okay, so I haven't seen Winter Soldier that recently, and I
Uh-huh.
totally agree with you with that. I do think it has to be something you have to get used to when it comes to the Jason Bourne stuff, because it definitely shows up later for Captain America. But I do think the helicarrier sequences and stuff, I think those, I've seen a lot of like really high profile critics criticize that, like it's just 2 hours of helicarrier porn where it's just like constantly showing it and flying around. And
I've got to admit, I was actively fighting falling asleep during the helicarrier fight toward the end.
that was definitely underwhelming.
I was
but,
really bored.
I totally disagree with you. Like the elevator scene and everything is like one of
Yeah.
the best action scenes
That's so
in
good.
all of Marvel movies. I think it really shows the vulnerability of Steve Rogers, and I think which only gets accentuated later on. But I think like the Hydra stuff was handled pretty well, and I don't know. I think it was generally a pretty compelling story, and I do think the Bucky thing is a little bit one note, and I'm not like totally on board with like the Winter Soldier. Honestly, I liked Bucky more in Falcon and the Winter Soldier than I did in Winter Soldier.
I have not watched the show, so I couldn't say.
It's not worth your time.
It's not worth watching. I'll say that, but
Huh.
it's. I think Sebastian Stan is pretty solid, and I think for you, I think coming off of the first Avenger and then going and seeing how he turned out is better than trying to like remember who Bucky was, and you can kind of see in the movie they try to like remind you like Bucky is his friend.
That's something I will point out. I had, when I originally saw this in 2014, I think a big reason I didn't like it was I was like, who is this Bucky guy? What? And I had seen Captain America. I just had no memory of him being in that movie, so I was very confused. I also admit when the original press release for this movie came out, where they were like, oh, the next Captain America movie is going to be called Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and I didn't read comics in middle school, so I just thought, oh, that sounds kind of boring. So they're just going to take him to the North Pole or something. He's going to fight in the winter.
Wow.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe you bring up vulnerability with the elevator fight. I, at no point in that fight, ever thought that Captain America was being injured or hurt or had any chance of not winning. So I think maybe this is where the invulnerability of these characters is starting to bug me a bit. Which you could argue has kind of always been an issue with this franchise, but like I commented on Iron Man 2, one of the reasons I like the action in that so much is that it actively feels like people are getting hurt and causing damage to each other, which I never really got that impression with this film.
Well, since we're piling on you, I'll just say real quick. I think this is by far Black Widow's best movie, and also probably Nick Fury's best movie.
Nick Fury's best movie for sure. Yeah, I would probably say it's Black Widow's. We all know which one's her worst.
I know you guys love Iron Man 2.
Iron Man 2 is great.
Too. I mean, I don't know. I think Black Widow consistently runs into the issue that she's sort of a non-character in a catsuit. Like,
No. You haven't seen Black Widow. You haven't seen Black Widow.
I haven't.
You'll find out.
So
right.
Perhaps
How does
actually,
Bill Clinton fit in the MCU?
perhaps when we get to Black Widow,
Putin.
I'll think better of her. But right now, every time that Black Widow shows up, all I can think is, oh, here's something for the dads. Like she feels so just like crammed in and impractical a lot of the time. Even the poster for this movie, like everybody else is like in an action pose, and she looks like she's at like a Victoria's Secret catwalk, and I'm like, what is going on here?
You know what's going on here.
I do, but I don't have to be happy about it.
You'll be happy about it after Black Widow. You'll go back to Iron Man 2 and be like, this is the best version we ever got. Anyway, we gotta freaking. This is going too long.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, you're next up, Christian.
I'm not. Oh, right, because we're running.
And down.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Okay, Zach, you're gonna start this one. Mitchell, are you ready? Zach, are you
Yep.
ready? Okay. And a 3.
No.
He's not ready.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Who's starting? I'm starting?
You are.
Okay.
Yes. And 3, 2, 1, go.
Dorcia.
3 out of 5.
Just cooling it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
5 out of 5.
Let's see Paul Allen's card.
5 out of 5.
Dating someone that works for the ACLU.
It's 2 out of 5.
Ice packs.
3 out of 5.
Zach Garrigus as Patrick Bateman.
4 out of 5.
Stomach crunches.
4 out of 5.
When Paul Allen said it's Morbid time.
5 out of 5.
My God. It even has a watermark.
5 out of 5.
Lecturing a homeless man about getting a job.
2 out of 5.
Killing the dog, too.
1 out of 5.
Murders and executions.
5 out of 5.
Mergers and acquisitions.
4 out of 5.
Hip to be Square by Huey Lewis and the News.
4 out of 5.
Returning videotapes.
5 out of 5.
The opinion that there are no girls with good personalities.
1 out of 5.
Feed me a stray dog.
3 out of
Cat.
5.
Christian Bale facial expressions.
4 out of 5.
This is not an exit.
5 out of 5.
Telling your lawyer that you killed a lot of people. 1
5
second.
out of 5.
Time.
Darn.
All right, we'll have 2 for
You
that.
guys are really trying to get me canceled. It's like, what is going on here? You know what you're doing. You're going to catch
I
me
do.
one
I
day.
absolutely do. And it is very fun.
I had to really think about cooling it with the anti-Semitic remarks. I was like, but wait, was he actually meaning it? Oh, whatever.
It's just a number.
It's just a number.
Do
Arbitrary.
I preview now?
You do,
Yep.
yes.
Pre the view.
Okay. Yes. We are heading to Akira Kurosawa land next episode.
Our favorite stop on the Magical Cinema Tour.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, I just kept going back there. Like, that was definitely my home base. And we will be discussing Rashomon. I think I discussed it during Magical Cinema Tour. If not, I certainly discussed a boatload of other Kurosawa films, and we discussed Yojimbo a bit in our episode for Fistful of Dollars. Yeah, and so this is I don't want to define it too heavily, but it's a pretty brisk movie. It's in black and white and it's subtitled, but it's around 90 minutes and it moves pretty quickly, and it really grabs your attention and doesn't let you go. And it's sort of a experiment in opposing viewpoints and he said, she said type stuff, and it gets pretty intense, and I think it's one of the most riveting things I've ever seen. So I'm very excited to discuss it with you both.
It's my first outing.
All right, with Kurosawa.
Yep.
It's a good place to start. I
Yeah.
think.
Cool. Epic. Episode 69.
Goodbye.
Bye.